Greetings, today is Sunday, July the 26th, 2020, and welcome back to my channel. We'll take a look today at the term capitalism. Welcome back. Now today we promise to look at capitalism. It's a wonderful term, it's layered with some complexities, but it's a highly organized term. And from reading I found out in presenting it in a simple way, which I like to do for average persons like myself. It's highly intellectual, it's highly layered, but for me, there would have been more than one theory presented, for example, by Karl Marx, and he had quite a subterranean and layered process. And there's also Max Weber, who saw things similarly but yet a little different to Karl Marx's theory. For me, I found that capitalism, its origins could be somewhat found in the period of industrialization in the 1900s, and especially amongst the great world powers that you see today, the USA for one and Great Britain for another. And there was also some other form of mercantilist capitalism in wider Europe during the early period. But this one that we are speaking about today, more or less, is rooted in capitalist and social and economic combination, which provides a potency that is driven by capital and is driven by how people would consume, how the proletariat would consume things. So more or less, if you look at it, you would see that Marx's theory would look at capitalism having a kind of, I would like to say the term contestation, or kind of construct between classism, in terms of there must be some form of upper class and lower class to help drive the process. So for me, you see like the bourgeois or bourgeoisie, we like to call them upper class persons who are largely responsible for owning the majority of wealth or capital. And this activity, as I mentioned in previous episodes, for example, looking at consumerism and commodity fetishism and what a commodity was, for example, this kind of activity really is driven by market forces. And then if you look at the bourgeoisie having the ability to have a sense of ownership, and then the proletariat would offer their labor or resources or somewhat to get employment. So then you would even have, in terms of Marxist theory, other terms coming out. For example, like you would be seeing the pricing of the commodity, or the value of the commodity being valued more even than the labor of the proletariat. So that means from the onset that the proletariat would be somehow working at that's my understanding, working at a kind of disadvantage as it relates to the price of the product to be consumed, or the price of the commodity. And as a result, you would then get the bourgeoisie even benefiting more so because of excess value in terms of that they would have put on their commodities against how they would have treated the proletariat who would offer their labor sources. So that is one layered, rooted theory that Marx looks at the impact of more or less the classes and how they would interact with each other in terms of the forces of market and capital, in terms of capitalism, and sense of private ownership as well coming in, and mainly people, in a nutshell, looking to see how they can profit and benefit at the expense of a working class citizenship. Now, Max Weber would have looked at it in a more direct way, in terms of direct exchange between the product and the market, and then between that, other more sophisticated systems would have come up. For example, like you would see banking structures being implemented to manage this capital as it got more complex. So you would see a kind of divergence there from Marx's theory, because he would have looked at it in a more surfaced activity, rather than how Marx would have looked deeper onto these other concepts in a more subterranean way. Max Weber would have looked at it, for me, in terms of a more direct approach. Like, for example, I will just refer here to what I was reading in my handy culture theory concepts, and this is by Andrew Edgar and Peter Sedgwick, and this is quite a handy book to read here as I present to you. But you would look at Max Weber's analysis of capitalism, and he would have said that it shares much in common, as I mentioned, with Marx's analysis of capitalism. But Weber would have, we noticed, placed greater emphasis on the surface organization of capitalism, and thus looked at capitalism as a system of exchange and consumption. And this was in 1964 and 1979. And he would have mentioned that the link between capitalism and rationalization is central to this account. And you know, and then they have this whole system of Weber's analysis of rationality responding to the increasing bureaucracy of capitalism, meaning that as it got more and more complex as a production process, more sophisticated forms of administration were required and needed to keep checks and balances in place. So for example, you had things coming in like double entry bookkeeping and how we got the whole day-to-day measurement of earning capital. For example, the need for accountants and other professionals to come in to manage this process, and even the identification of a distinct form of finance and capital was identified. But then we also had another interesting twist, because we had here the Austro-Marxist by the name of Rudolf Hilferding, 1981, around 1910, looking at the link between, and he was taking it further, between the increased concentration of capital so that production is controlled by fewer larger corporations, leading to monopoly capitalism, which is interesting now. So people like your big conglomerates, your big companies now looking to seek more control as this system got more and more sophisticated. But you know, eventually looking with everything within context, Marx had predicted the collapse of all these things, but begging to differ, they didn't seem to come about and come true for him, simply because as systems got more and more sophisticated, they found other ways and means as consumerism got more and more complex and other developments happened in terms of society to manage this process that as we live with it today, it didn't completely collapse. So thus you had theories of late capitalism, for example, by Jamerson 1991, and post-industrial society by Bell 1973. Looking at disorganized capitalism, Lash and Urey as well, 1987, and various accounts of postmodernism, which suggests a more or less radical break from capitalist modes of organization and moved into different things and different elements. So you had impacts and influences such as recent developments in technology, with the decline of traditional manufacturing industries and the rise of communications and a knowledge-based, knowledge-driven industry would be things that would counteract the full hardcore principles laid down in Marx's initial prediction of capitalism. So you see how complex a term it is, and you see my enjoyment in trying to always delve into these things and figure them out. And even to look at the impacts of World War, for example. So if I go back, you will see like the period of organized capitalism thus begins the emergence after the First World War, and it happened after the First World War and continued into what I just last spoke about in terms of beginning to solidify and break away, that the imminent failure as predicted by Marx in the purest sense did not really happen. So that's it for me for now, folks, and I hope you enjoy spending a few minutes with me to look at this complex but intriguing term known as capitalism. And I will bring some more other interesting topics to you, not only on culture theory itself, but being a visual artist, I also would like to talk a bit about art, or even sometimes engage you in an activity as I paint and draw. But these are quite fascinating areas that I believe persons who are not necessarily scholars like myself, but persons who like the area of culture and arts would tend to, try to inform themselves and to discuss and present, because these to me help to inform our knowledge of how the world that we live in work, or at least how the system, the Western system that we live in work, and the theories associated with some philosophical thinkers as to the kind of livelihoods we lead and how it influences us as individuals in one way or another. So I just want to thank you for again spending some time on my channel. And I'm looking forward again to present to you yet some more episodes and topics in terms of art and culture as we move on in this journey. So once again, have a wonderful week ahead and be safe out there in the pandemic. And for you and your families, enjoy yourselves nonetheless, and stay strong and also stay positive. we'll do the same for now. So see you next week. Bye bye.